Yeah, segueing
Okay.
into Homo Deus here because it has very much the same type of structure here. That I think the only part of the Homo Deus that the average midwit reads, which is just the first part. So I mean, it's split into like four parts, just like *Sapiens*. Although it's formally categorized to three parts with an intro, and like the intro part that people actually read, it's called like the New Human Agenda, where he builds up certain ideas. Some of, I mean, most of it I find quite ridiculous, but it's written in such a way that it's very much attention grabbing, very much something you can talk about around the water cooler, and almost a little bit clickbaity in a sense. So in the New Human Agenda, he sort of breaks down, in a sense, what he says is okay, what was the human issues if you look back at the 1,000 years in the past with the more traditional belief systems, like he talks about Abrahamic religions and so on. I mean, what was the big issues that they were trying to solve and that has plagued humanity? And he brings up three things. It basically is war, uh, and it is famine, and it is disease, right? So it's like the three horsemen, or it actually is the four horsemen because he talks about death as well. So it's like the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It sounds very poetic that way, and he goes on and talks about how like the old belief systems, like the Abrahamic religions, whether or Islam or the Hinduism and Buddhism, it's all sort of basically coping mechanisms in a world where that is fraught with basically high child rates of mortality, a lot of disease that is uncontrolled. They don't know how to deal with wars that seem to be plaguing people constantly, and in a sense, I mean, it's this is this kind of super broad brush strokes way of talking about this that also underbuilds this kind of shit lib worldview, in a sense that, like, this is all the awful things that were happening in the past, and this is we were able to transcend this through the Enlightenment values, and the like you showed the economics graph, that we went
Yeah,
from the low trust stuff into the high trust, high credit growth thing. That's how we got out of it.
gotta keep pumping.
uh, but he presents it in this materialistic way where the only thing people want is to have more pleasure and less pain, and like the old belief systems were not able to deliver on basically making life less painful. Like the God of the Old Testament was not able to cure diseases or stop the wars and so on, even though people kept praying. So when people were able to shift over to this kind of growth mindset and this more humanist view, that's where you have this kind of explosion into this new era where there are more people dying of obesity than there are dying of hunger. And like we have all these great vaccines, and there's a lot of praise for the World Health Organization there, which is of course typical. You have to like go through the go through the standard kind of globalist issues,
Of
where
course.
epidemiology is one of them, of course. There's this interesting point, by the way. I mean, he has this the chapter or the sub chapter in the New Human Agenda that's called Invisible Armadas, where he talks about epidemiology and all of these problems that were fixed because of vaccines. And he actually makes the case that he talks about the AIDS epidemic, and he says that if I'll just quote here: "Just think of what would have happened if AIDS had erupted in 1581 rather than 1981. In all likelihood, nobody back then would have figured out what caused the epidemic, how it moved from person to person, or how it could have been halted, let alone cured. Under such conditions,
It's
AIDS might have
electric.
killed
I've
larger."
just gotten like a tweet that both Semiogog and Charlemagne have been gotten in some trouble for being too spicy on the platforms recently. So I remind you guys that we're now in election season of social media. before
Mm,
before you do anything fed posty.
that in such an environment, the HIV virus would not have propagated very far.
Yes, that was my
Yeah,
my
I
thought
mean,
as well.
it's so bizarre to me, and that's why I sort of think he's very colored by the fact that he is gay himself. Like he can't just like see the idea that, okay, back then, I mean, if it is true what he says, that they believed in scripture, like in very deep belief in scripture, it wouldn't be hard to see even though they didn't know about germ theory and so on, they would have basically blamed people like him, and they would have been right. So it would have been stopped pretty quickly. I mean, if you can say anything about like the value systems from more of these traditional religions, is that they were able to safeguard a lot of those types of epidemics from happening.
Yeah, well, the executions would have put a definite stop to the spread.
Stop the spread. This is how they did it back
It's a week to flatten the curve.
then. So, I mean, oh yeah, of course. So then you have the epidemiology, the disease, the war stuff, which of course he attributes very much to like the modern kind of post World War II, like, you know, the American hegemony and so on, that's allowed trade to sort of flourish, and because of all the trade and the complexity and so on, there's less war, at least in these types of spheres. And he'll talk about the intelligence economy, which is basically, I mean, this book was written, I think, in 2016, and there's a lot of it that doesn't hold up very well. When he talks about, you know, oh, you know, now like the main value is intelligence and knowledge, and like all these Google engineers they have all the value in their heads, so there's no incentive to go and rob people or to start wars and so on. And it's like, okay, I mean, who do you want to be? And you know, there's not going to be any problem when you outsource all the hardware manufacturing to one part of the world, and you just have a bunch of brains sitting in the other part. And you know, there's never gonna be any conflict here, right? I mean, at that point, I think maybe this was even before Trump got elected, because it seems like they just assumed this neoliberal project was going to go on forever. I mean, that's pretty much the kind of one of the premises of this book, that it's the trends that were going on, they're just going to keep going on into like 100 years into the future, and that's going to result in a type of transhumanism.
Yeah. The gradual march of history will always continue in one direction. The right side of history will always win, and blah 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 as they go on. The absolute body blows to the liberal world order that we have seen this last 6 or 7 years perhaps hadn't landed yet.
No, they hadn't. I mean, this was right before. I think it was before Trump, and then it's before for the COVID stuff, and the, you know, with the Ukraine. I mean, it's with China, the rise of China, and all that stuff. I mean, it hadn't really sunk in at this point. So there's so many of these problems that, I mean, it doesn't hold up very much in that sense. There are other parts of the book that does hold up when he's talking about, like you said, the servant class, or the class of useless eaters, in a sense, where not because we don't have stuff for them to do, but there seems to be kind of a growing class of people who they just don't want to work anymore, right? They just want to kind of sit at home and do cooking and video games and just kind of check out of society. And I mean, it's not because of obsolescence in a sense, but they are just kind of completely plugged out.
Adam Friended will be put in the cyber mines in Harari's future.
No, he's going to keep being a streamer, this high value occupation. Okay. So, I mean, then he goes into, you know, he starts talking about death, and he does concede the point that, you know, in spite of all of the medical advancements that have happened, we haven't really extended the natural lifespan that far. It's really just that there's a certain amount of people that would have died in like childhood, during childbirth, say, you know, in the 30s and 40s and so on. But I mean, you still had people in the past that would grow to be 90, 100, 110 years old, who were extremely robust. And that's where he gets to the point that the low-key based point that I mentioned, where he said, like, because of these pressures, the average person in the past was healthier, basically. So, but I mean, it's not really implied here, but he made me sort of think about bio-Leninism in this chapter, where he talks about all of these people who probably would have died at an earlier age if it wasn't for some type of medical intervention. And now we have a very large chunk of the population now that are basically being kept alive by modern science. And it's not a Nietzschean thing. It's very much a kind of bio-Leninist idea. Especially, I mean, you think about people like Movie Bob and so on. That's what I was thinking about when I was reading it. that that's kind of the miracle of modern science, is that we have like 2,000% more movie bobs than we would have had otherwise, but we don't have
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah.
the wise elders
So freaking
in a
happy.
sense.
Yeah.
It makes me dance with joy.
But I mean,
Thank you,
reading
Andy.
it,
Thank you.
I mean, of course, you could sit and criticize the kind of history bits more factually, but I do, on some sense, agree with him and think about some of these points where I think it is true in a sense that a lot of the appeal to, say, traditional religious life and having like a traditional religious metaphysic is being kind of embedded in a world that is more of an existence minimum. In a sense, that's not affluent, where you're more kind of in touch with very hard material realities, the death
Sure,
and so
but
on.
that's my point. You know, and especially in the later parts of *Sapiens*, he basically goes on this rant to, or to on this crusade against the speeding up of our society that's happened the past, let's pull a number out of a hat, 200 years, right? And what baffles me again is that instead of saying, all right, so we have for the past 200 years, totally went off the reservation compared to what, we are built for, spiritually and physically. So instead of trying to sort of figure out what worked before and try to at least, look to that as possible solutions, his solution is to just, no, we'll just, we have to go faster and then, somehow use some sort of demonic technological device to get us out of this.
Yeah, he presents a lot of these things like, say, like the progress of capitalism and the growing GDP as like this inevitable process, like this, it just has to keep growing, and all of these sort of what you consider natural factors in this system, they just keep pushing in one direction regardless. So it's sort of pointless to try to fight against that or try to put a stop to the system. We just have to lean into the progress, quote unquote. So
Yeah, Walrus, can you pull up Julius Flavius' little message there from the chat?
Which one of them?
The first one, the long one, rather. That one, yeah.
The meaning of life in these modern civilizations, people arbitrarily construct an unnatural way of being that lacks a relationship to his deepest forces, to become what one is not, breaking all limits to make everything possible for everyone.
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, it is, that is essentially the convergence of these ideas.
It is.
Complete atomization, complete deracination, essentially the creation of a wage seeking, rent seeking, nomadic. Well, to use a Marxist term, lumpenproletariat.
Ah, yes, that's a good word, actually.
Nice.
Not even workers, but just
Yeah.
Eaters.
what would it be in English? Trash proletariat, perhaps.
I suppose that's the closest. But I mean, I think people who are aware of Marxist thought have heard the word lumpenproletariat before. I had something here in my notes, but just keep going. Maybe I'll bring it back.
Yeah, so
find it.
finishing up this chapter, when he's gone through like the four horsemen of the apocalypse and how we've now defeated the four horsemen of the apocalypse, so he asks, okay, what's the next frontier for human beings? And there's two then sections here that are, I mean, he really leans into them, I think, to just to sell the book, basically. The first one is then the right to happiness, where he talks about the kind of shifting attitude towards happiness, and that now that we've defeated the four horsemen of the apocalypse, thanks to science and humanism and so on, we've just kind of abandoned the old gods, and now we're kind of embracing what he calls the Epicurean attitude. That, I mean, Epicurus is one of these Greek philosophers that the new atheists like to quote. I think he talked about this sort of, if God is what's that quote? If God is malevolent, then he, oh damn, I don't remember it. Let's see if I can find it.
Just for anyone curious, Monophthalmos has the literal translation. And if I remember correctly, he's German or something, so...
So here, is God willing to
Or
prevent
Or
evil
am
but
I
not able? Then
thinking
he
of
is,
someone else?
yeah, then he is
Sorry,
not
Monophthalmos,
omnipotent.
if I misremembered. Sorry, continue, Lydic.
Yeah. No, the quote that I know Epicurus from is from the "Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. If God is he able but not willing, then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence come evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? Right. So he is one of the Greek atheist philosophers
Yeah.
who's like this sort of proto, what do you call, like this proto utilitarian, proto hedonist in any sense. I think Spengler basically says that this is like the Greek version of atheism.
Yeah,
It's the Greek proto-Sojak.
But of course he says that like this attitude was extremely fringe in the old world, but now the attitude that the God doesn't exist, so you should just try to be happy, has become like the standard attitude to have. And not only the standard attitude to have, but it's been expanded because Epicurus basically said that this is something the individual is supposed to do. Like, you're just supposed to focus on yourself and try to be happy in the moment. But now this has become the goal of governments. Let's say like with GDP and the goal of the economy at large, which basically trying to satisfy as many needs as possible. Even brings up some of these
it
countries.
creates a like permanent connection between the state and the people, right? Because they create the making a sick populace gives you mandate and reason to sort of keep them on the treadmill, right?
Line must go up.
Yes.
How otherwise will you ever be able to pay for your fully automated luxury communism?
Yeah,
Someone
that's where.
all those pills.
Yeah, on the pills, by the way. I mean, there's, if you could bring up the quote sheet there, there's some very insidious quotes and conclusions that he comes to in terms of this kind of human happiness projects.
Let me see here.
So it's if you go under basically the new human agenda, then the right to happiness, and then this is on kids and Ritalin.
By the way, that's such a nefarious fucking term. The human happiness project. Just taste on those syllables. I mean, that is. I don't know what to call it, but downright satanic.
Yeah.
The human
I agree.
happiness project. Jeez.
On kids and Ritalin. If science is right and our happiness is determined by our biochemical system, then the only way to ensure lasting contentment is by rigging this system. Forget economic growth, social reforms, and political revolutions. In order to raise global happiness levels, we need to manipulate human biochemistry. And this is exactly what we have begun doing over the last few decades. 50 years ago, psychiatric drugs carried a severe stigma. Today, that stigma has been broken. For better or for worse, a growing percentage of the population is taking psychiatric medicines on a regular basis, not only to cure debilitating mental illnesses, but also to face more mundane depressions and the occasional blues. Now, I want to add, because I'm disgusted just reading this part. They don't cure the problem. They just make you addicted to the pills instead. Okay. For example, increasing numbers of school children take stimulants such as Ritalin. In 2011, 3.5 million American children were taking medications for ADHD. In the UK, the number rose from 92,000 in 1997 to 786,000 in 2012. The original aim has been to treat attention disorders, but today completely healthy kids take such medications to improve their performance and live up to the growing expectations of teachers and parents. Many object to this development and argue that the problem lies with the education system rather than with the children. If pupils suffer from attention disorders, stress, and low grades, perhaps we ought to blame outdated teaching methods, overcrowded classrooms, and an unnaturally fast tempo of life. Maybe we should modify the schools rather than the kids. It is interesting to see how the arguments have evolved. People have been quarreling about education methods for thousands of years. Whether in ancient China or Victorian Britain, everybody had his or her pet method and vehemently opposed all alternatives. Yet, hitherto, everybody still agreed on one thing. In order to improve education, we need to change the schools. Today, for the first time in history, at least some people think it would be more efficient to change the pupils' biochemistry. Jesus fucking Christ. Oh. I disavow.
Wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is some of the most dystopian stuff, in the book, basically. And this is also one of the chapters I feel like he's not really addressing kind of the counter argument here and sort of the problems with, as you said, basically. I mean, yeah, of course you can think that you have chemicals inside your body that make you happy. Okay, conceded. But I mean, this is supposed to be in response to like an actual objective real life situation. And if it's not in response to that, I mean, the problem is not going to go away. Even if you keep having the experiences, you're still somewhat aware of objective reality. Like you have a good feeling, but you're still aware of the fact that this is induced by some drug, and it's not
Yes, for
exactly.
now. But I
It's
mean,
not,
if Harari had his way, you would just sort of like rip out that part of your brain, right?
yeah. I mean, so if you think nothing has any value outside of pleasure, like this is the logical conclusion, like that you're just stuck in this kind of pleasure box, and you're not supposed to have any relation to objective reality at all. It's just supposed to be like one consciousness experiencing pleasure forever. And he doesn't say it that explicitly, but it has to be kind of inferred from
Yeah.
the stuff that's written.
There's a secondary, or perhaps a primary level of problem with this kind of reasoning that he's going through here. And you see this with more modernist philosophers and people, as we say, that belong to the techno. What did we call it now again? The techno.
Techno globalists.
Yeah, the techno globalist
Yeah.
factions of the cathedral. And that is the problem, that they somehow have managed to be captured by their own rhetorical device. And that is the rhetorical device of the brain as computer. This is essentially like something that comes up in the late 90s, that you start to equate the human mind, like think of it as a computer. It runs different programs, it has a processing speed, and it has logical fault loops that will make it go, blue screen in certain. And this kind of analogy.
I seem to recall you can find, theorizing about this from the old sort of original hacker movement, but of course from the other way around, saying that in the future the state is going to be able to program you, basically.
Yeah. There's a small thing with this, and that is that this is essentially coming to. I mean, if you talk to like a normie on the street and you start spewing this kind of thing, they will go, yeah, it's like a computer. It does things and it has a processing and speed and stuff like that. So it has permeated culture. The small problem is that it's now gone to the level of like drinking your own Kool-Aid. It has gone
Exactly,
into this, and now it's come around that they actually believe this kind of really ham-fisted and really bad analogy, to kind of used as a way to kind of dumb down and simplify the concepts of human consciousness. But we are now running into the central problem of this kind of analogy, is that it has nothing to do with reality.
Exactly.
The problem is that the human brain is not a computer. And I mean, if you look at the primary research done within neuroscience and applied mathematics, from the likes of, if some of you know who Sir Arthur Penrose is, which is the world's premier mathematician, more or less. And he's been working on this for like the last 15 years.
You mean Roger Penrose, right?
Yeah, Sir Roger Penrose.
Yeah, I thought you said. I think you said Arthur, just in case anyone.
Yeah, no.
said-
It's, if some of you of the audience perhaps follows some kind of science awards, there's the Penrose Medal, for example, within mathematics and physics, and there is a good interview. We'll see if we can find it sometime. It will come up in future discussion, I'm sure. But the thing is that he more or less looked into cognition from a mathematical perspective, realized that he didn't know about much enough about neuroscience. So he just stopped his work and dedicated like 5 years to becoming a neuroscientist, because this is the man for the layman to understand. He's a contemporary of Stephen Hawking, and Stephen Hawking thought that, well, he was the much smarter one of them.
He was the big-brained boy. Yeah.
Yeah, he was the real big brain boy, the cross-disciplinarian who did all the things.
Yeah.
But since he didn't have the quite dramatic life story that Hawking had, he never got the
limelight.
No. He was just
hubris
a genius and a well-adapted one at that, and he didn't like public attention, so to speak.
Right.
But to get to the point is that he essentially then have come to the point that he's very vehemently against the idea that consciousness is computation. He's saying that no, consciousness is not computation. Consciousness somehow emerges within the atypical structure of the brain's neuron and neuron transceivers, because something about the structure of how the cell is built up means that it can encode quantum data upon the atoms that it's built up from, because of somehow how this fold does a subdimensional fold of the structure. But this in itself is not computation. Rather, it seems like it's what do you call it in computer science? It's a layer between two systems.
Interfacing?
It's an interface system rather. So Arthur Penrose believes rather that the neuron is essentially more like a radio transceiver than a computer in itself.
Yeah, that's very
see.
well put. And
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to sort of add to that when I talked about, like the techno-globalists and guys like Harari, who sort of see themselves as being outside of history, right? That's sort of how they see. They're just objective, and they can just see everything outside of history. And even in this book Homo Deus, he will mention the fact that in the Middle Ages, people would talk about the mind and the consciousness as a book, because that was the premier technology. And that was just, look how stupid they were. Like, they thought the mind was a book, haha. And then he'll move on to the industrial age. Well, then people thought the mind was an engine, like the steam engine, and the body was a steam engine. Look how stupid they were, haha, right? And then now they're like, oh yeah, the mind is like a computer. Oh, it's just like that.
But we know a lot better these days, Ludwig.
We know better, right?
Yeah, we're the smart ones now. We have bobs.
There's nothing wrong with this analogy. Like, there's no pattern going on here that we're mistaken in some way. Like, the stuff that we know now, that's just objectively correct, and we have to follow that. We can't look at that critically. It's very bizarre, but this is how he actually thinks. When I spell it out this way, it sounds absolutely weird, but when you two have read him, you probably recognize like this pattern is that he will spell out the argument and then he'll just go with the retarded conclusion anyway.
I think I saw a tweet that someone made about modern media that I think speaks to this point, and he said that modern writers are completely incapable of writing a person or a character more interesting and intelligent than themselves. End quote. I think that essentially what we have here. It is like someone who can speak all the words, all the buzzwords, who can read all the books and collate the data, but in the end, he's unable to grasp what all this actually means. He can't go further than himself.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I'll see if I can just finish up the first
And
chapter.
that is a big sort of thing we talk about, like society as a whole. If you want to do like black pilling about, you know, bio-Leninism and stuff, and you notice that in more and more people, that ability to go beyond yourself, both in theorizing, to be able to look, you know, outside yourself is disappearing.
Yeah,
Talk about, you know, feminization of society, right?
Indeed. But I think this also is, speaking of his political or socio-political class within the cathedral, is that all of these little projects that they have running and this kind of neuromancer pipe dream that they have, that we will become immortal because we will upload ourselves to the cloud. I think that once they start going forward with that Neuralink kind of interface to try to make this reality, they are going to be sorely disappointed and to realize that it just doesn't work. There's nothing to upload. Well, perhaps a screaming monkey that just wants to fuck it and do nothing else. All the higher connection doesn't work because there's a component that they can't see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
no,
it's
I
a
think
sum of its parts they can't replicate, right?
No, what I think what's going to happen is that they will spend a lot of processing power uploading some type of program that can repeat quotes and things that they said when they were alive. It's going to have nothing to do with their consciousness or their experience or anything, but you'll just keep a sort of footprint from a person.
And to be fair for Harari, I have seen clips of him saying that, you know, people are afraid of AI. No, they're not afraid of AI. They're afraid of artificial consciousness, and we are nowhere near artificial consciousness. And he even says, I don't think we're ever going to be able to make that.
No, I mean, he goes very much in the other way. He doesn't believe in uploading consciousness. He basically starts deconstructing the value of consciousness itself. He says sort of, what's the point of consciousness? And that's something you get
right.
into.
And again, he says something based, and then he ends up like being a retard anyway. How does he do it?
He can't help himself.
He can't keep getting away with it.
No, Walrus. We come back to this always. You know, it is the based position. You are what you are. You can't be more than you are.
So, but I mean,
Right.
if you look up my quote sheet again, he has one of these shitposting diagrams on consciousness. Since we're jumping around a little bit, anyway, if you go on, basically it's under the human spark, and then on consciousness, if you can bring that up. So it is extremely kind of shitposty. Is what happens in the mind that doesn't happen in the brain? Nothing. So why do we need the mind? And then, okay, we'll go to write something. Where does it happen in the brain? And then it just goes back to the
right.
Back to
explain that one, theists.
Well, this is also generally the people who have like this kind of materialist worldview problem, is that they can't, the consciousness becomes a problem for them. So you have guys like Daniel Dennett and people who will just try to explain that, no, you don't actually have consciousness. It's just some random noise that's firing off in your brain. It's not real in a sense. So we'll just remove it from the equation because it creates too many problems for the tidy models that we've created.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting thing. You had one of those. I think it was Descartes, that one of the Enlightenment philosophers, that went into this what is consciousness, and then stated categorically that consciousness exists within the pineal gland of the brain.
Okay.
This is true.
Yeah, and then then they try to like, okay, let's just dissect the brain of a dead person. What is this? And he just made the absolute take of, well, of course you can't see, could do it now. He's dead.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, and if you can't look at it without the person being dead. So how are you going to refute this statement?
So I'm right,
That's,
you know.
So,
Yeah,
but
talk about
the
snake
God
oil
there
salesman,
was
huh?
essentially just an inverse God of the gaps argument. That he essentially had no idea, but thought that he needed to make a materialist statement upon consciousness, to refute God, but backwards. So he just, it's a thing, and it's in this part of the brain creates it.
Yeah.
So it's just
The
bullshitting.
important thing is that you have belief and faith that it exists, of course.
As opposed to belief that cognition comes from your soul that is given to you by God, and
Obviously,
you
yes.
can't believe that. That's backwards.
Yeah,
Not the
no,
very.
but I think Descartes was Christian, right? He wasn't an atheist. As far
I
as I
was
remember.
an Enlightenment philosopher, so he was nominally,
And
that thing.
Yeah.
But the thing was something about, if I remember correctly, I think it was something about how does the soul express itself through the material body and
Yeah.
with cognition and blah blah blah. And he just let's see here, let's roll a d6. The pineal gland. Prime suspect.
I mean, yeah, we did touch on, I think, Descartes a little bit on the Sam Harris stream, but yeah, he also did run into the problem of trying to explain that he said that you have the spirit, or like this consciousness, in the pineal gland, and then you have the body, which is basically deterministic, and then you have to explain how exactly does one thing interact with the other, and this is also something he was never able to explain. Like, he has all these kind of very he does his correspondences with a lot of royalty and people who could read at the time, who were asking him about this, and he was just there's a lot of mental gymnastics to try to explain away.
Yeah, Monophthalmos has a good quote in chat there.
I was
Same
about to bring it up. It's the same phenomenon as Linkola. The autism makes him take sightseeing trips to based places, but he never stays. That's pretty. It just annoys me how someone can be, so often correct in their analysis and then just deliberately take the wrong outcome.
Yeah, it's like he wanders into the gated off. He's on the big X marks the spot of base territory.
Right.
And he almost has it. And then he wanders off back again into liberalism, off into the hedges, and it's just gone. It's like, for fuck's sake, man! I've been for like 3 chapters walking.
You were right there. You just had to dig.
No, you just have to look where your fucking feet are. But no, then it just meanders off into the distance.
Oh God!
He's aggressively frustrating writer, I must say.
Yeah.
But I think this is something that the distributist described in the video when he was talking about like the Sam Harris clips that have emerged from the trigonometry interview, where he basically said, I mean, if you're going to be a public intellectual today, the conversation is basically on the rails. I mean, there is a certain final destination that you're going to reach if you want to have best-selling books and be a part of the cool kids clique. So you can take some detours, but you're going to end up at the same place anyway. You're going to basically, support this kind of shitlib world order and the moving on to the next kind of more transhumanist world.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I don't want to
sound
too grandiose or anything, but it feels like the only way you can actually, get some real opinions these days are in our spheres, because you actually have to sort of risk being wrong, right?
Yeah, I mean, you find people who have less to lose.
I mean, where else in society can you risk being wrong in a significant way, right?
Yeah, you can't. If you score too many, like if you step the bound too many times, they just kick you out, right? You lose access to that network and to get your ideas out there. But yeah, we're just okay. I'm just going to try to get through the rest of the book.
Yeah, sorry, we memed a bit too much.
I mean, it's all good stuff, but I don't know. I don't want to go for like 5 hours, so we'll let's see what I can do with the rest here. I mean, the end of the chapter is like he has this kind of subsection about the human beings becoming gods, which I think is the most kind of memeable part of the entire book. But then again, the book doesn't exist without this chapter, because I mean it's called Homo Deus, and this is sort of the only part about like the Homo Deus, the kind of transition from the Homo sapiens until these sort of god creatures, where he, I mean, the arguments that he makes is both from the kind of cybernetics parts, where he says that, you know, people are in this economy, they're just going to keep making more cybernetic parts for people who have problems, like say people who can't walk properly, they'll get, you know, cybernetic enhancements, and people who can't see will get cybernetic enhancements. And I mean, but the thing that's going to make the guy who can't see with cybernetics can, you know, super enhance a regular person. And like the same thing with medicine, and the same thing with like genetic engineering and so on. So he basically says that this effect is going to compound over time until human beings are basically so unrecognizable from what they are today that they become this entirely new, you know, transhumanist god creature that's called the Homo Deus.
A new Homo, yeah.
Yeah, a new type of Homo. And
Yay!
he does he does compare it to like this sort of pantheon of Greek gods, like it's the Apollos, the Aphrodites, and we're gonna like become like these.
Oh shit! This is why he's
mystical,
against monotheism. I was wondering why he was like polytheism is good, guys, in *Sapiens*. I didn't connect it until now.
Oh man!
Sorry, I just had a eureka moment.
Interesting.
No. Now to the point. Since I haven't read Homo Deus, I also thought that this was weird. But I'm sorry. What a fucking nerd!
I mean,
Yeah. And this is like probably one of the least historical chapters, where he just goes into pure speculation that this is what's going to be the future. You're going to have like this pantheon of gods. It sounds almost a little bit Nietzschean if you read it the right way, but he doesn't stick on the point a whole lot. I think this is kind of like just a selling chapter of the book. And now, I mean, we're done with like the first, you know, the new human agenda. Then he'll go into like a bit more of the actual thesis of the book, that is a lot it's a lot darker than the first parts, even though you had the part with the kids on Ritalin and some of these other you know, painful quotes. But let's see, this is the next part. Then it's called part 1, how Homo sapiens conquered the world. So then he will first go through the subchapter that's called like the Anthropocene, where he talks about kind of the development, first about the domestication of animals, where he basically says that, you know, man has basically made the world in his image, where like every animal is domesticated, and there's so little actual wildlife and competing interests to the human sphere, that now we're at a point where the world is so kind of Homo sapiens centric that the kind of intersubjective belief systems have almost more power than the objective world, because it's also kind of tailored around human beings. Then he has a chapter about factory farming again, where he starts talking about how sad it is that pigs get slaughtered and how they should be free to roam around and stuff. I mean, we talked about that previously, like with the animal rights, and then he'll go through a part about like the development or the evolution of belief systems, where he says that, you know, when you go back to the hunter-gatherer era, they were animists, basically, that they had this kind of belief system that's similar to what Pocahontas has in the Disney movie, where you kind of talk to nature, like everything is seen as being like equal and on equal footing. And
yeah, I didn't bring it up, but he talks about that quite a bit in *Sapiens* as well.
Yeah, and he gets it completely wrong. Like you said, Logic, that it's, you know, everything is like in balance and on equal footing, and that's not how animism works. It is rather, you know, a system where the spirits of the elements are in constant warfare against each other and struggling for dominance. This kind of there's some kind of equalitarian spirit within animism is just, you know, modern soy cringe.
You hear this kind of typical shitlib way of what do you call romanticizing animism, like, oh yeah, the Native American cultures, they will, you know, when they need meat, they ask the cow, you know, are you okay? Is it okay that we take the calf, and is it okay that we kill you, and so on, and they have to get permission from nature, and they have this like this really weird perception of how it works. That it seems to be like the super, nice guy type belief. But of course, I haven't read upon animism at all, really. So
No,
I
no,
have.
it's essentially completely different. What essentially they have it as backwards. What you do is that, say for example, an animist that hunted an elk or something, he wouldn't oh, can I kill you? I need to eat. No, that's not how it works. What you do is that you essentially, once you have killed the animal, you honor its spirits in some kind of fair and open competition. You won, you prevailed, but you still must honor this thing because it lived, and its life will now nourish you. So it's more of a give and take relationship, and this also views that like there's a almost Nietzschean communal spirit within that you have a superseding biospirit that all elks have a part in, so to say. That there are the individual spirit of the individual elks, but then there is the elk as a concept spirit. More, like the sky is a concept
You
spirit.
thank the elk for being truly an elk and providing you with food, nourishment.
Yeah, you prevailed. So, in a sense, life begets life in a certain way.
Yeah.
So, but there is no asking for permission or asking for forgiveness or something like that. There's an honoring that you could have killed me, but I fucking killed you, and now I will live. But that doesn't mean that I'm. In a sense, it's like how do you say this? You exalt in your victory, but you don't dance on their grave.
Hmm. Yeah, you sort
You
of
honor
honor the cycle of the hunt.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's very good to have you on the panel for this particular reason, because there's like so many like blind spots I have in terms of history. So let's see. I mean, then he'll talk about then the transition from animism to theism, and his presentation of theism, especially with the Abrahamic religions, is that it's just a pure kind of ad hoc justification for agriculture. That you have the idea of man having dominion over the animals and in the natural world as described in the Bible, and that basically means that agriculture is justified. And so we changed the relationship from this kind of friendly, asking for stuff from the animals to now we have dominion over the animals, and we have permission from God to basically control and domesticate them, which of course is it's interesting, but it's a sort of, I find it to be quite strange, because there's a lot of parts of the Bible that I don't see this as being an endorsement of agriculture at all, really. I mean, you could look at some of the kind of what you'd say the good guys, or the main characters in the Bible, like Abraham or Jacob or David. They're all shepherds. I don't think there's any good guys in the Bible who are farmers. Basically, it's not presented as a sort of positive way to live. It's really more of like this agriculture leads to big civilization, which leads to sin, which leads to ruin, basically. Uh, I mean, even in the story of Cain and Abel, that's
I
kind of like
would say that it's kind of interesting that all the, if you will, the prominent in the individuals within the Old Testament, at least, are essentially cast in the mold of Cain, not in the mold of Abel.
Hmm.
No, the other way around. I'm stupid.
yes, and that's
Cain
where we
Oh
get
yeah,
to
that makes more sense.
farmer,
Yeah.
and Abel is the shepherd, or the animal handling guy.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. No, I
So I mean, if we go to the story of Cain and Abel, then I mean, of course, if you're on the internet at all, you have like the Jordan Peterson kind of shit take, where this is about jealousy, basically, and he draws this into some stupid like psychological story. But I mean, what actually happens
or
here?
you're an absolute nerd and you think
Yeah,
this is where vampires come from.
great. But Cain and Abel are brothers, right? And Abel is a shepherd and Cain is a farmer, and they both bring up an offering to God. And Abel basically brings up like this kind of burnt meat. It's really like this kind of like low quality destroyed meat, and Cain brings up like fresh vegetables. But Cain is basically rejected. I mean, God sort of will approve of the shepherd. He approves of the meat offering, and he rejects the vegetable offering. And
Yes.
after that, then Cain kills Abel out of jealousy, and he gets the mark in a sense. So already in the beginning of Genesis, like God rejects, like basically reject vegetables, reject farming. From that point, so I find it a little bit sort of selective to just say that like this is just an ad hoc justification for agriculture. In a sense, like that's kind of my two cents on that.
Yeah, it makes a. I mean, the Bible makes a kind of, if you look at that aspect across it, kind of clear distinction about the what is the high and the low. I think it says something about in the Ecclesiastic, something about they have these long remunerations of who shall have what, and like the flesh of the birds and the animals of the land are given unto blah blah blah, and essentially it makes the partitioner that the upper strata of society shall have these things, and the filthy peasants and the filthy merchants shall eat grain and carrots and nothing else because they are low. And stuff like that. Maybe not Ecclesiastes, is what I'm saying. In any case, one of those was such a long time since I read the Bible.
Yeah, same. But I did remember that part. So then he will just sort of illustrate that the next kind of step in the belief system evolution is then from theism to humanism, where it's really man exists kind of for its own sake without the need of a higher justification, and the human kind of intuition and intelligence in itself is a kind of justification, where the animals, he goes back to this sort of that's factory farming stuff. Like that's where it goes from having dominion over the animals to basically, I mean, you're a human being, so you don't have to give a shit about them at all, and you can just justify any type of industrial, slaughter. Which he then goes on to talk about how basically Nazism is a kind of humanist ideology and so on. I mean, it's this is something I've never, again, the kind of vagueness of humanism that I don't know. I mean, are Nazism and communism humanist ideologies? I don't even know what to make of this stuff. I could see how sort of like liberal democracy could go into a type of humanism, but he does make the case that the communism and Nazism basically have similar core assumptions about the belief in human potentials and economic growth, kind of progressivism in a sense that underlines that belief system. So, and I mean, of course, like I said, the thesis of this book is actually to try to make the break from breaking down humanism to move into post-humanism. So let's see where he goes from there. So then we get to the part 2 that's called Homo sapiens gives meaning to the world, where he sort of goes through more of the same kind of intersubjectivity framework that I mentioned previously in the stream, where he talks about how human beings are valuable because they can tell stories, and these stories can allow societies of mass and scale, and how these stories develop and so on. Like this is where you get the elite theory stuff, and so you have this sort of 2 points here where he says that human beings are valuable in the sense that they can cooperate and they can collect information and work at scale, but the individual human being doesn't really have anything that's valuable from the humanist perspective, because it's all like every part of the like the humanist assumptions, from free will to the self to God, it's all like BS. God doesn't exist. The self as we know it is like, neuroscience has apparently shown that there's no individual. It's like just individuals, as he calls them.
The
Where
only thing that's valuable is coordination.
It's coordination and processing, right?
Yeah.
So the human being is not an individual self. It's just a collection of processes or algorithms. I mean, this is the word that he keeps kind of using, and it's really part of the sort of computer mania that we talked about previously, that he keeps just honing in on this idea that no, the human being is just an algorithm, and it's just an algorithm to reproduce itself. Like that's what evolution is, and we have to, like, that's what science says now, right? We have to reject the idea of the individual. So Let me see if I have some interesting quotes.
Let me just inject here.
Yep.
I mean, without being too fake posted, but what a fucking tribesman he is. I mean, if you look at essentially upon the metaphysics of that group, you can really see why the atheism is so strong within the expat community. I think a lot of Christians perhaps doesn't have a bearing on this, but there is no real heaven and hell within that religious framework. There's just Sheol, this misty place where the spirits go to fade away into nothingness over time.
Yes, I mean their religion basically is just like this kind of tribal, a type of tribal Bronze Age religion, and that sounds like it's an insult, but it's a very kind of apt explanation. They just believe in like the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The God they believe in is just sort of a patron God that's going to give them a reward in this life. There's there's nothing after that. They just have to sort of follow the maintain the covenant, as they say, and if they do that, they're promised riches and success.
Yeah,
If
just
not,
a
then
deal.
it's over.
Yeah, it's weird also because if you say just a Bronze Age religion, but as Bronze Age religions go, that's really rare. I mean, most religions from the Bronze Age do work within a framework, usually of life, resurrection, life, death, and resurrection. Perhaps not within the Christian context of yourself being yourself, but rather rather like the Hindu or Indo-European concept of that parts of you will always be broken off because they are not eternal, and you go into the wheel and you will come back eventually, but the part that will come back or that will survive death, perhaps, maybe, if you do it the right way and the proper rites and so forth are observed, will not be the part of you that you in life perceive as you, but rather more core elemental parts, and the you that you know as your logos in a sense can of course survive death intact, but that's rare and takes a lot of hard work in life to actually do. There's a lot of variance on these themes as they go around, but the idea that you just go away, fade away somewhere in some misty place doesn't really exist. It's kind of unique, actually.
Yeah, we should do that. Should be a stream topic in the future. But Walrus, if you bring up the quote sheet again, there's this thing that I think would be nice to read out just to summarize his kind of what he sees as a sort of breakaway from the liberal view, contra like what's the modern scientific
Is this the
worldview.
liberal view
Yeah, it's the
quote thing?
in the bottom there. It's under, let's say, Homo sapiens loses control. It's the last point from the content table.
Yeah, okay, I see it. Yeah, I'm going to bring it up. The liberal view. 1. I am an individual. That is, I have a single essence that cannot be divided into parts or subsystems. True, this inner core is wrapped in many outer layers. But if I make the effort to peel away these external crusts, I will find deep within myself a clear and single inner voice, which is my authentic self. 2. My authentic self is completely free. 3. It follows from the first 2 assumptions that I can know things about myself that nobody else can discover. For only I have access to my inner space of freedom, and only I can hear the whispers of my authentic self. This is why liberalism grants the individual so much authority. I cannot trust anyone else to make choices for me, because no one else can know who I really am, how I feel, and what I want. This is why the voter knows best, why the customer is always right, and why beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What a fucking based takedown of liberalism, huh?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most complete takedowns I've actually seen of humanism and liberalism. Even though, I mean, I guess you could find more of them in more kind of reactionary books, but from a book that's kind of like mainstream bookshelf thing, it's quite unusual. So if you
Shall
look,
we
if
see
you
how
read
he?
read up the scientific modern
Yeah,
scientific
let's see
view
how
as
he
well.
fucks it up with the modern scientific view. The modern scientific view. 1. Organisms are algorithms, and humans are not individuals. There are dividuals. That is, humans are an assemblage of many different algorithms lacking a single inner voice or a single self. 2. The algorithms constituting a human are not free. They are shaped by genes and environmental pressures, and take decisions either deterministically or randomly, but not freely. 3. It follows that an external algorithm could, theoretically, know me much better than I can ever know myself. An algorithm that monitors each of the systems that compromise my body and my brain could know exactly who I am, how I feel, and what I want. Once developed, such an algorithm could replace the voter, the customer, and the beholder. Then the algorithm will know best. The algorithm will always be right, and beauty will be in the calculations of the algorithm. Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate. Yeah. Sorry.
I have no mouth, and I must
Yeah.
scream. Stuff
On
that's,
every nanometer. Yeah.
Oh,
There was
jeez.
this. I watched a YouTube video on my way back home from the distributist. They did an interview with Benjamin A. Boyce, and they talked a bit about the idea that you can remove something like power from the sort of the power dynamics from human life, from human society, being sort of the goal of the managerialism. And I feel this way here, like because the idea was, you can't really remove the things that make the human experience the human experience. See what I'm saying? And that's like, if you remove everything that makes you a human and replace it with an algorithm, even though you can think to yourself, yeah, I'm scientifically correct. Well, I mean, where's the human? The human is gone.
Yeah, I mean, this is reading this is kind of made me think a lot, because even though he might make some historical mistakes or simplify certain concepts, there are, as a person who's considered myself a dissident or consider myself reactionary, yeah, I'm a little bit puzzled as to how I should approach this, because I could try to approach try to attack the scientific view that's presented here, but then I end up just trying to cuck for humanism, basically. So I feel like I'm put in a bit of a vice here, in terms of how to approach the problem, to the point where
Mm.
even if you have like the same views as Ted Kaczynski, you're basically like too humanist for for this guy, right? So
Well, I
then, yeah.
mean, the reality lies outside of this dichotomy, right? Even though you might think that saying that, oh, humans aren't individualistic because, feudalism was great. Let's just, say that. Even
There's
within
also
that, there is individualism. I mean, look up sort of Radical Liberation's medieval anarchy project, right?
Mm.
There are room for individualism within structured, organized, hierarchical societies. It's just that that individualism exists on the planes in every hierarchy.
Yeah, just let's go to the bullet points down there, because these are a bit. If you
Yeah,
go
see,
there,
these are not actually quotes. So yeah,
they're more like
Hide it,
summations, but
hide
shut
it.
it down.
yeah, but they're summations of the previous points, more or less. Uh, so that's why I think they're good, because they are
Yeah.
good, condensations of all these meandering ramblings. And like to say, okay, sure, like take the first one. As algorithms, no, not really. Can they be hacked, molded, and manipulated? Sure. Sure, you can do that. Different things take a different amount of effort, but yeah, sure. still not really a value judgment, but
Yeah, humans can be manipulated. Right?
yeah,
Big whoop. Yeah.
uh, then again, there are certain parts of the human that you can't really touch. And if you try to manipulate them that way, you will get a violent reaction because you've touched upon something fundamental that becomes really defensive if you try to fidget with it. It doesn't like that at all. And the idea here also that we don't need all the people anymore. That he also proves that we have these useless eaters. Well, they like the Bible says, the poor will always be among you. They have always existed, and perhaps they fill no other function than as a dire warning to the rest of the species that is intelligent enough to see that okay, that's not a good idea,
But just to elaborate on then point number 2 there a little bit, because this is a sort of attack on liberalism that I've actually not been as exposed to. Where he basically he goes into it with the same type of mindset of it's just like pure, the mental intersubjective constructions are just pure pragmatism, and liberalism doesn't have any inherent value. Then he said, okay, what's the kind of like practical case for liberalism? And he says that in like the previous century of total war, you wanted to have as many people included in like the World War I and II as possible, meaning that the idea is that you give as many people as you can rights, then they will be more motivated to fight in wars to have those rights. And he says that was kind of like one of the driving factors behind feminism, was to get women into war and participating in wars, getting peasants and poor people participating, getting as many people as possible into the trenches, into factories, into like every part of the war machine, basically. But now with when you have all this kind of smart technology and this kind of hyper specialized technology, you don't need to have a total war. You only need a couple of specialists here and there to maintain the machinery and the artificial intelligence and these kind of smart missile systems, and the computer hackers, they will do the most of it. But there's no reason to try to include a large part of the populace in the same way, so you don't really need to give them all these kind of rights. It's really more of, okay, they'll just be these useless eaters who'll be on UBI and watch porn and play video games, so the rest, like
Yeah.
these elite people, can just maintain society and so on. And that's kind of his
and fly the burning man.
So I mean, it is a surprisingly sort of powerful thought. I'd not kind of thought of liberalism in that sense, because he, to me, it's just admitting that it's just been more of kind of a moral thing, where it's seen as kind of the default moral position. But he just says that the moral position for liberalism itself is not really strong enough if it's not practically feasible. And we're seeing that with both with, like, say, the COVID lockdowns and the stuff that's going on. It's that it's not really practically feasible anymore. Like, all of these people having all these rights when they can't contribute anything, it's just becoming a problem. And that's why we need to move into this kind of transhuman future, basically, this sort of pod life, and the these kind of AI cyborg supermen.
Jesus Christ. I'm just baffled. I keep, like, how can he draw these conclusions? Like, how can he, like, dunk on liberalism this hard and then be like, yeah, but we just gotta go harder?
It's amazing, isn't it?
I'm pushing the based and the cringe button at the same time.
Yeah, it's all just about the needs of the managerial class, right? That's what it's all about. It's just like,
Yeah,
how
it is. I mean, it's the
to
friend
address
enemy distinction that they get. He's just justifying this for Schwab and the cronies.
Yeah, but it's you
in
just
the
look
end.
at the elites in the world and the kind of problems that they have currently, and this, here's the recommendation: just drop liberalism. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's
work
what I'm
for you
saying. This
anymore,
is
so.
like a super, like, all of this is just dumping the PDF in an email to Klaus Schwab. Like, this is what we have to do, right?
So, and there's some finishing points there. He will talk about the idea of consciousness, and that, like with the graph that we looked at previously, sort of really the idea of consciousness as just a kind of pollution, basically. it's consciousness as a kind of epiphenomenon, and he says that that's like the prevailing scientific explanation. Even though, as Leo Morales says, it's not really true. Like there's a lot of competing explanations for that, but he just goes with the most kind of materialist explanation that it's just some kind of byproduct of something else, and it doesn't really have any value because these kind of non-conscious entities like artificial intelligence, they can do everything that a conscious being can do anyway. So we don't really need consciousness. We can just address the problems. So I mean, it's just like peak managerialism. It's like, okay, you don't even need to be conscious. Like the only thing we need to do is just deal with these managerial tasks and find the most efficient way to do it. And I mean, like the human experience has nothing to do with that. It should just be discarded completely.
Mm. And we need someone to consume.
Yes.
Yes. You're just gonna eat,
For
and of course the last part is then he talks about the
random reason.
dataism. That's going to be like it's
Oh,
this kind of
jeez.
religious or ideological worldview where it's like, you know, data is the only thing that exists in a sense, and I mean what the computer is made of that's processing the data, it doesn't matter if it's carbon or silicone or flesh and blood. Basically it's all just kind of computing data power, and whoever can compute the data the best and can process the information the best is who should run society. So you reach the conclusion that it's really the artificial intelligence that should be running society, basically, because they can deal with reality that is like the data better
So
than
you know
human
this
beings.
guy isn't a programmer.
Yes, that's
But
one of the things too.
he is very skeptical about AI, from what I
Yeah.
gather from like interviews.
It's a little bit on and off.
To be
I mean,
fair.
there's some funny things as well that when you look, that's why I like reading about these books that are like, you know, these kind of techno optimist books where they will take a lot of examples of certain AI companies that I didn't know about, and one of them was this company called AIVA. That's a company that creates artificially intelligence generated classical music. And I listened to it. I mean, it sounds pretty convincing. He has like this entire subchapter about artificial intelligence creating art, which I mean we've seen it with this kind of what's the name of that AI thing that created all these funny images when you post the text and
The Dolly.
the Dolly, yeah, and there are other ones as well. But you know, he says that there are similar artificial intelligences that can create music that where they've sort of submitted the music to music competitions and they've been able to win and so on. And I mean, it is at least just a kind of funny thing to look into, even though if you're not convinced by his thesis in general.
The general problem with also that when it comes to the entirety of AI and machine learning, you run into the kind of, you know, procedural problem that they can't really create. They can just, you know, amalgamate data, and it has to be like a distinct prompt from a conscious actor. So what essentially is that it's AI generated. Yeah, that's all that it is. It's generated from things that humans have made. So you can't really.
I don't know what this has to do with anything, but it's pretty funny. I'm not gonna lie.
Leo sent it to me. I think it's related to the Hinduism we talked about a moment ago. I'm sorry for derailing. I can't do a Trump voice, but I hear it in my head. Huge.
The best. Well, it kind of, you know, conforms to the initial statement of it's history bigly.
Bigly, yeah.